Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, so as I said, the question came up, how do we deal with anger? How do we deal with aversion? And this is actually, it's a pretty straightforward and pretty important question. Like, I obviously there's some pretty blanket advice that's given throughout the Pali Canon about how to deal with aversion, and that is don't like don't have aversion, like get rid of it, extract it, pull it out by the roots, don't suffer it for any amount of time. And furthermore, the Buddha goes on to say that of the three poisons or the three roots of defilement, that being greed, hatred, and delusion, that hatred is actually the easiest to remove. Because for one, it is one which is intrinsically painful. Like, while we might have brief bursts of vindication and righteousness that kind of fuel us with this, yes, I'm an agent of justice. They're getting what they deserve. I'm right, they're wrong. We might have these moments of pleasure, but overall, the experience is unpleasant. And I think most of us, when we're become conscious that we are experiencing anger, we try to get out of it because it is unpleasant. It is like a fire that is consuming us far more than it could ever consume an external object. Yeah. But furthermore, the Buddha says that anger is very blameworthy. And so also from a social standpoint, we know that there will be consequences of anger. And this is something that, it's kind of an entryway to Buddhist practice, to be honest. As I said, it occurs to me that most of us, probably the first thing we understand about the Buddha's teaching is that we should get rid of our anger. Yeah. The Buddha talked about loving kindness, and that sounds like a really good idea because it's the most tangible, obvious way to reduce our personal suffering. Hey, is there something you can do to help me reduce my anger? Most of us are probably on the fence about removing it completely. We probably think that it's justified in a few cases, especially that guy's dog. Every time it starts barking, or leaf blowers. Oh my God, if I could snap my fingers and remove all leaf blowers from the planet, I might just do it. And then we'd have to go back to sweeping. But unfortunately, that would be an aversive act, and there would be serious consequences. And so it is with most aversive acts. There are usually severe and oftentimes immediate consequences of acting on aversion, of speaking on aversion. And we, as much as we hate to admit it, even thinking aversive thoughts in the way that it permeates into our being, it affects our posture, it affects our eye contact, it affects every word that comes out of our mouth. Even thinking angry thoughts, even maintaining a string of angry thoughts will have consequences. This is almost always to deal with people, yeah? And this is also an important point of anger. Most of the time when we desire an object, we are the one who suffers the most, yeah? So for desire, we're the ones who are like, oh, I really want the thing, I really want the thing, I really want the thing. Unless we go and steal the thing, we're probably not going to get severe consequences from our wanting of that thing, yeah? The most of the consequences are going to be for us internally, and they're going to be kind of subtle. They'll be like, wow, I can't stop thinking about the thing. But with anger, because it will almost always involve another person in some way, or an idea of a person, there's going to be consequences in a social aspect too. So if we were to, I don't know, say I have my alms bowl and, it's, I just get angry at it. It's like, it's just the wrong size. And I know that there's this monastic rule that you can get a new one if yours becomes damaged. So I'm like, you know what? I just don't want this alms bowl anymore. And I go and I throw it on the ground and I put a hole in it. Now that act, because it is only a physical act, it is not a verbal act, it is not a mental act, it is just me breaking a thing and nobody else is involved, there is only going to be physical consequences. I'm going to have a hole in my bowl. Yeah. So when we act out on physical objects, often the karma is very weak. Yeah. Because it doesn't involve anybody. We damage something, but that's it. That's as far as the consequences go. But most of the time, I think when we look at anger, we will see there is a person somewhere in the anger. Like when I get upset at leaf blowers, I am not getting upset at leaf blowers. It's not the leaf blower's fault. Yeah. It's the guy who has his finger on the trigger of the leaf blower. Yeah. That's who's at fault. It's the guy who invented the leaf blower. That's who I'm angry at. Right. And so it is with most inanimate objects. We get upset at our car. Are we really upset at the maker of the car? Are we upset at the person who sold us the car? Did the company that makes this car, like they always make bad cars. Yeah. So this is something to look at for our anger. The most important thing to know with anger is get rid of it. We want to get rid of it. So before we even go into the sutta, before we even look at the 5 ways that we can deal with anger, we have to want to get rid of the anger. And some of this comes from the wisdom that anger is an intrinsically bad thing, and it will pollute our mind stream, and it will bring consequences to us just to entertain this anger. Yeah, it's going to draw other people in. So say I damage my bowl, and then I go and I try to get a new one. At this point, I've involved somebody else. And they'll be like, well, how did you get a hole in your bowl? And I'm like, well, I threw it on the ground. So I didn't like it. That person is less likely to give me a bowl. They're less likely to trust me when I ask to borrow their bowl. they're probably going to distance themselves a little bit from me, because anybody who will like wantonly act on anger and damage something, they got a little bit of a violence problem there, right? And so the moment we involve another person, there will be consequences. And this is what anger is like. Yeah. So the first thing is recognizing that anger is worth getting rid of. The second thing we notice is that anger comes from a mood. So this is what we were talking about the other day during the tea time, is that kind of all of the techniques we might use for getting rid of anger, we have to recognize that they're just techniques. Yeah, they're often, the techniques just deal with getting the anger off of an object, but the anger itself is coming from a mood. And if we develop the third satipatthana, which has us look at the mood of the mind and become sensitive to the mood of the mind, then we'll recognize that even before we got angry at that thing, there was this mood of frustration, annoyance, tiredness, resentment, and that it didn't yet have an object. Yeah. So often the thing that leads to anger is already kind of percolating under the surface. If we are in a good mood, it is hard to get angry. It takes effort to get us angry. And that's because this mood has to develop, and it can't develop if we've already got a good, wholesome mood going. Yeah. And so what we'll also notice is that even just applying a technique, it's not going to be a one and done kind of thing, right? So we'll give the strategies the Buddha gives, but part of the reason people are like, wait, is that it? Is that all I get? Is because they know that it's not that easy. You know, if somebody says, oh, if you're angry at a person, just cultivate loving kindness towards them. And they're like, that doesn't work. It does. Yeah, it does to a degree, but we have to understand the first thing you have to do is get your anger off of the object and see that your anger is something different than the object. Your anger is not coming from the object of your anger, which is, again, it's usually related to a person. Your anger was already there. It's already kind of percolating in your mind and body. And you finally got an object, an outlet for it. Yeah. So we might be able to get it off of the object. And then the love and kindness, the compassion, the things that we will use, they are to help us resolve this underlying mood as well. And that's where we really get over the anger. So if we find that, okay, look, I tried loving kindness and it's not working. Well, okay, we slow down and we say, okay, I tried, loving kindness, and maybe I decided, I don't want to stay angry at this person, but it's like really sticky. Now we've got a basis for this, right? We realize that there's going to be some underlying mood, and this will dissipate over time if we don't feed it. So the techniques are really to help us stop feeding that underlying mood. And because the mood is probably going to be very deep and very subtle in the mind, we might not know where it's coming from. Sometimes it'll be obvious. Like, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I've just been having a bad day. I've got a case of the Mondays. And it's like, so get out of my way. And then it's just very obvious. They're like, I just haven't been in a good mood all day. And you're the victim of that. So I'm sorry. But other times we just won't know. We're like, I just saw that guy and I just instantly hated him. And I don't know why, but I can't get my mind off of it. Well, that's what we're doing. So when the Buddha talks about dealing with anger, the obvious thing is like, don't get angry. Cultivate loving kindness towards things that you like and use this as a buffer to keep yourself from getting in that mood. When the Buddha does talk about getting over anger, he's talking about something very specific, and this is a grudge. Yeah. He's talking about how we get the mind off of an object. And this is what the Buddha is talking about when he's talking about a grudge. How do we get over a grudge? How do we get over when the mind has decided that that thing is what we're angry at? As one of the funny things about ill will is that people who have the like aversion as their dominant character trait are often very good at concentration. Yeah. Because this is one of the funny side effects of aversion is it's very good at focusing on an object. Yeah. When you're angry, you're very good at being angry at one object, right? When you're hungry, you're often like, oh, I like that. Oh, and I like that. And oh, I like that. But when you're angry, you are angry at that. And you are focused, right? So the ability to get our mind off of an object of anger is actually a very good tool, very good thing to develop. Yeah? So the sutta we'll look at is actually very straightforward, very simple. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Fives, and it is Sutta 161. Yeah, and this sutta is on resentment, grudge, a sort of fixation. Yeah. And the Buddha simply presents to the monks, monks, there are these 5 ways to get rid of a grudge. He says the first one is to cultivate loving kindness towards that person. Yeah. So again, when the Buddha is talking about him, he's strictly talking in a person sense. So if we find that we're angry at an object and we're like, oh, I mean, I'm not angry at a person, I'm angry at the weather. Look into it. Often it's going to be a person, and sometimes it might even surprise us. Like, well, I'm not angry at the weather, actually. I'm angry at the person I think is making the weather. I don't really have a good explanation for what I think that is, but I am sure that it is out to get me. It decided this morning it was going to ruin my picnic. That's what I'm angry at. I don't know who it is, but I am angry at them. And then we have something to work with, right? This is why these are presented in this way. So the first one is kind of obvious. Cultivate love and kindness towards that person. The second technique is we can cultivate compassion towards that person. And I'll go over these in a bit more detail. The third one is that we can cultivate equanimity towards that person. The fourth one, and this is easy to overlook if we're like really hard on ourselves or really trying to focus on sila, is we can ignore that person. And it's so obvious as we didn't even know we were allowed to do that. But yeah, just stop thinking about it. Just avoid the person that you're getting angry at. Just don't think about it. Yeah. And the fifth one is curious, is a bit like equanimity. Yeah, is often the reflection we use for equanimity. But the final one the Buddha says is we can apply the reflection on karma, thinking all beings are the owner of their actions. Yeah, they are the heir to their actions, born of their actions, related to their actions, and have their actions as have the result of their actions. Yeah, anything they do for good or for ill, of that they will be the heir. So the Buddha says we can apply that reflection to them as a way of helping alleviate our resentment, alleviate our grudge against that person. And these are the five techniques. And so if we were hoping for something like, yeah, I've tried loving kindness, but do you have anything like, with a bit more oomph? And we're like, well, okay, these are to be developed, right? Just deciding that we're going to have loving kindness for a person is not going to like, oh yeah, the grudge just let go. But it is something that we can develop, the ability to do it. And it's a whole package. So the first one is loving kindness. And interestingly, the very next sutta, Sutta 162, is the Venerable Sariputta talking about also 5 ways of getting over resentment towards a person. And what he says is in effect, if you find that you've got resentment towards a person and you recognize that they sometimes have good conduct, then that's enough reason to get over your resentment towards them. He says, but then if you notice that, well, maybe they don't even sometimes have good conduct, but sometimes they have good verbal conduct. Sometimes their speech is good. Well, that's a good enough reason to get over your resentment towards them. He says, maybe you don't particularly notice they've got good conduct or good speech, but you recognize that on occasion they do have pure-hearted, wholesome intentions. For that reason alone, it's worthy to get over resentment towards them. Yeah. And then he goes on to permeations of if they have a combination of these, then it's obvious. Yeah. You should. Now, is that obvious for most of us, though? The idea of metta, of loving kindness, is friendliness. Yeah. Metta comes from mitta, or friend. It's an idea of companionship or cordiality towards other beings. And this is often the fuel, the basis of our metta practice, is recognizing the good, kind, friendly things that beings do for each other, right? So if we find that we're resenting a person, Mr. Leaf Blower Man, why are you doing this to me? Don't you know I'm trying to meditate here? Don't you know it's the new moon, the bad karma you're getting by doing that leaf blowing right outside my door? Well, is Leaf Blower Man always blowing leaves? Is he always doing it on the Uposatha? Is he always doing it right outside your door? And is he doing it to get to you, or is it just coincidence that these two things happen, that you were trying to meditate and somebody was blowing leaves outside your door, or as it were on the other side of a forest that you were camping in, completely unaware that there was somebody camping in that forest. They had no idea that they were ruining your afternoon. Are they always doing it? No. Sometimes they're playing with children. Sometimes they're feeding their dog. Sometimes they're donating money to charity. Sometimes they're doing good things for you. They might even, as they're blowing leaves, and obviously I'm not categorically against people blowing leaves, because sometimes they're doing it on the paths that I walk on, and they're doing it for me. They're doing it with the thought, may this person not trip on sticks, or may they not get, those little bristly seed pods stuck in their sandals, so that every time they take a step, they're like, ah, ah, ah. So they're doing it actually for a good reason. And so when we try to get over our resentment through metta, often we are stepping aside from the thing that's annoying us, right? And instead focus on any kind of good conduct of body, speech, or mind that that person might engage in. Yeah. And this is strategic thinking, right? Perception is always biased, and we can't help that. So we're leaning towards the perceptions that paint this person as a good, beautiful, wholesome human being. These are not categorically accurate, because even kind perceptions are biased. They are misrepresenting the reality. The reality is that all people are nuanced. They're good sometimes, bad sometimes, they're a mix. But by focusing on the good things that the person does, we can help dislodge this resentment, which is very laser focused on the bad things that we perceive them doing. This is how we use metta to get over resentment. Yeah. We just focus on the nice things that they do, the good things that they do, the kind things that they do. And if they do those things for us, all the better, all the more powerful. We're like, that's right. The guy helped give me a ride to that place last week. He was like, am I really going to be angry at him? So he really helped me out. And the moment we think that, we're like, oh, why am I angry? Why would I bear resentment towards this person? This person helped me out last week, and I might need their help next week. This is very detrimental for me. And that's when, once we've got the resentment free, often we can recognize as like, wow, okay, I need to work on my anger. And so we use the metta to get over the anger, but then later, probably once we've simmered down a bit, we'll use the metta actually to protect us from the anger. Yeah, we'll go back and it's part of the development of metta. We will, when we're nice and calm and feeling good and loving the people we're with, then we introduce this person that we sometimes have arguments with, we sometimes have grievances towards, to develop a buffer of metta towards that person, a goodwill towards that person, so that the next time they do something that might upset us, we've got that buffer. And you're like, no, I like this person. Yeah, that's frustrating, but he's a good guy. Yeah, I'm going to give him a buy on this one. And if that's all it takes to keep us from getting angry, all the better. The second strategy is to use compassion. Yeah, and compassion is actually a pretty powerful way of getting over resentment. So the idea, and you can see this, you see this out in the world, and it's really amazing when it happens. If you notice that people, for the most part, in the flow of their daily lives, are kind of doing their own thing, yeah, and they're really trying really hard to stay within their comfort zone. Yeah, I've got my bubble, and just don't get in my bubble. Yeah, I want to do the things that I want to do, and I want to do them the way I want to do them. And as long as you don't get in the way of that, we're going to be okay. Capiche? But then, yeah, they're living too, and they're trying to move their little hamster bubble through the world, and you're gonna rub up against people, yeah. And that's when you see it. Most people are like just a hair's breadth away from being upset at the people they're around, and especially the people they live with. And that guy, he didn't screw the jar back on the pickles all the way. And so I picked it up by the lid and it came off and fell on the floor. And it's like, why are they always doing that? As though they're doing it to spite you. Yeah. And I mean, it's just part of our lives, right? And it's built on that, not seeing the suffering, not seeing the true cause of suffering. But when there is a natural disaster, when there is a crisis, when something goes wrong, when there's a fire, when there's a flood, when somebody gets hurt, it is amazing how these people that otherwise wouldn't even look at each other suddenly group together and help each other out, and they put down all their other thoughts. And there's this amazing human element that arises where everybody recognizes who is suffering, the cause of the suffering, and they work to help it. And I've often told the story. I had one teacher who, told me that his strategy, whenever he came into the room of the monastery for the breakfast meeting, all the monks would get together, all of the anagaricas, the stewards would show up for breakfast, and he would look around the room. And rather than thinking like, oh, I've got a meeting with so and so about the building project, or oh, I really want to talk with so and so about the sutta I read, and I know we'll have a really good conversation, or thinking like, you know, this would be really great if nobody talks to me and I could just go off and do my own thing. Rather than thinking any of those thoughts, he would sit down and he would say, who's suffering the most today? And he would look out in the room, and no matter who it was, whether he thought highly of that person or he thought less of that person was useful to him or not useful to that person, the second he recognized, wow, that person's really having a hard day, that's the person he would focus on, even to like the detriment of everybody else. So like, look, you're not suffering, you're okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And he would focus on the person who was suffering, and he would work to try to deal with whatever was causing that suffering. And this is the capability that all of us have, right? To use this human element, this recognition that suffering is impersonal. Nobody owns the condition of suffering. It is a quality of our human existence that can never be fully eliminated as long as we're in a human body. Recognizing this brings us together. It removes the boundaries and it gives us something to work with, right? So resentment wants us to build a wall. It wants us to separate. It wants us to segregate that person over there and say that they're the reason I'm so angry. But if we recognize how that person is suffering, that barrier immediately comes down, because if we can recognize that suffering, we can probably relate to it. We can probably empathize with it. That empathy is really us, connecting it to our own experience. And because we can understand it, we can understand their pain. How could we be mad at them? Right? Is again, that human element gives us tremendous power to just set everything else down and focus on dealing with what is the biggest problem in human life. Well, it is dukkha, it is suffering. Yeah? So there's a lot of like specific ways we might cultivate this. You might often hear like, well, think about that person and think about the suffering they may be experiencing. But I found that, oftentimes, rather than getting very personal with it, because again, that's what we're already doing. We're already taking the things that this person is doing very personally. We're already getting, developing very complex perceptions about this person's motivations and why they're trying to mess with us. Stepping aside of that and just looking at some impersonal quality of suffering that you actually might both share. Yeah. Like somebody cuts you off in traffic, rather than thinking, oh, maybe that person is having a really bad day and they didn't know that they cut me off in traffic. Yeah. Thinking, wow, traffic sucks. And here we all are on this road trying to get somewhere, and yet we have to share the road. And it's just, wow, traffic is just a bummer. And it's a bummer for you. But the amazing thing is, traffic is also a bummer for them. And if you recognize that traffic is a bummer for everybody, then you stop feeling so angry at that person. Yeah. Because they're also just trying to deal with this common problem. Now, you might not approve of the way that they're trying to deal with it, but they're trying to deal with the source of suffering. And if you focus on the suffering, you might actually be able to find that you kind of agree with the person. You're like, yeah, I'm not going to cut anybody off, but I totally get why they're doing it. Because, if I could get home even just 5 minutes quicker, I would probably, do it, as long as I, wasn't hurting anybody to do it. And suddenly you find that you're not holding intense resentment towards that person. And this is the way that we can use compassion or a recognition of suffering to help free us from the burden of a specific grudge towards that person. And we've generalized it, we've freed ourselves. So then we recognize, like, the only reason I even perceived it as that person cutting me off is because I was already upset. I was already having a bad day. I already want to get home and I'm already thinking about the traffic. And then that person cuts me off. And lo and behold, the source of the anger is with me. So then I'm just going to breathe, like, you've got it off of the object, you're not feeding it anymore, so it can start to filter out of the system. Very notably, and many teachers point this out, we probably see the pattern, right? Metta, Karuna, Upekkha. Wait, isn't there like a third Brahma Vihara? Isn't there a third divine abiding? And most teachers will point out, it's like, by the way, isn't it interesting that the Buddha doesn't include sympathetic joy in this list of ways to get over a grudge against somebody? And it should be kind of obvious in a way that if the person really is blowing the leaves off of the path onto your doorstep while you're meditating, knowing that you're meditating, and they're really getting a kick out of it, then cultivating this sense of, oh, they're really enjoying messing with me, probably isn't going to help you get over your resentment, right? And yeah, so mudita is not always the best way of dealing with anger. Mudita is a great way of getting yourself in a good mood and sustaining that good mood. It is a very lofty divine abiding that kind of puts us in a place of just like loving life. It's a great way to not get angry in the first place, or to appreciate the little things so much you can't possibly be annoyed by them. Yeah. You even, when you've got a lot of mudita, you even start to like the little annoyances. You're like, oh, that thing, that feeling you get when you drink a cold drink too quickly, and it like it hurts and it makes your brain freeze. It's like, isn't that cool? Isn't it? This is just the weirdest thing. It's like, it happened to me the other day, and it was like, and it was so funny. And that's what you have when you have mudita. You're like, okay, normally you'd be like really annoyed. You're like, oh, I did it again. But when you got a lot of mudita, you're just like, this is the stuff of life. Yeah, I wouldn't have had a story otherwise. But now I get to talk about drinking a cold drink. So we skip mudita, just set that one aside. And one of the interesting things is, rather than cultivating sympathetic joy, that's why compassion is so strong, yeah? The thing you probably have in common with the person you're resenting is not the source of your joys. It's probably the source of your grievances, yeah? Because that's what you're experiencing when you're experiencing anger. You're experiencing like a grievance. You're experiencing discomfort, suffering, yeah? And so compassion really kind of blots out the need or the usefulness of focusing on the good things that you have in common with the person, which will probably be hard to think of anyway. Yeah, and probably won't be as effective in the moment that you've got a grudge. But then we move forward to upekkha, and upekkha is equanimity. So when we're cultivating equanimity as a Brahma Vihara, often we're thinking about karma. I think, well, everybody's the owner of their actions. Curiously, the Buddha kind of puts that in the fifth slot. So just talking about equanimity, what I find is really useful to look at with equanimity, and when we've got it like something is caught on a person or an object or a thing, and we're angry and we're upset. The equanimity is when we consciously decide to not try to get away from that thing. When we consciously decide, like, look, that's the way it is. Yeah. And I'm just going to accept that. This is just the way it is. Yeah. And this is something like, it's a bit more basic and fundamental than focusing on karma. It's just saying like, okay, well, look, this is happening to me. And so I'm part of it. Yeah. And what we find with anger is often we're trying to set up that boundary. We're trying to push this thing away. We want this person to die. If this person would just stop existing, there'd be no problem, right? That's what our mind is telling us. But we can't. Like, the person will continue to exist. And that doesn't actually help us get rid of the anger. Again, the root of the anger will still be there. So equanimity is this kind of gentle reminder to our mind, look, that person is there. And that person, and moreover, whatever we're going through might be appropriate. Yeah, it might actually, we might deserve it. We might have walked right into it. Yeah, or it might have nothing to do with us. And all of these things fall within the umbrella of equanimity. We just be like, look, this is just, I can't get away from it. So why try? Why waste all my energy getting upset and resenting and putting up barriers about this thing? So this can actually, it's very powerful and it's very simple, right? It's like, wow, so I'm really upset at so-and-so, but we live together. There's not much I can do about it. And while that sounds kind of like spiritual bypassing or these like buzzwords that people, it's not. Now, there's a difference between equanimity and apathy. Yeah. They were like, okay, look, no, 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 no. I'm going to just like, this person no longer exists. And I'm going to do whatever I can to get this person out of here and on their way. And may I never see them again. That's not equanimity. That's actually a kind of aversive action of wanting the person not to exist with the mistaken assumption that then I'll be happy. It just doesn't work that way. As anybody who has, persistent, problems with anger or aversion will tell you, it's like, yeah, just getting rid of that thing that I think is making me angry doesn't deal with the anger. If it did, then obviously we would say just do that. Just get the person transferred out of your place of work and you'll be fine. Isn't it funny that the second that person does leave the place that you're working, somebody else at your job is suddenly the person that you're angry with? And it may have been somebody that you thought was on your side against that other person, and suddenly they're the person that you're having friction with. So equanimity is just like, look, somebody at the place I work, somebody in my school, somebody in my household is going to be the person I'm most annoyed at. Somebody has to take that slot, just by definition. There has to be somebody I'm the most annoyed at this place. Yeah. So what if I just accept that? What if I were glad that it's so-and-so? Rather than, it's like, why? Just say like, wow, I'm so glad my grievance is coming up towards you because I can think of some good things that you did. And if you were to leave, I don't know who I'd be angry at. It could be anybody. And it would just toss everything up in the air. So it's like, you stay right where you're at. You keep doing what you're doing. I will work with my anger and we'll be all good. Yeah. Because the object that I know I can deal with. Yeah. Who knows what will happen when you go? And I could be angry at anybody at a moment's notice. So the fourth strategy, again, it's really underrated. And it's one that actually gets used a fair bit in like a monastic setting, where you got a bunch of monastics who just want to keep to themselves living in a container of a monastery, is just ignore the person that you have a grudge with. Just don't think about them. Yeah. And it's like, well, that couldn't work. You'd be surprised. Yeah. The only reason it wouldn't work is if you have an underlying belief that you're not in control of your thoughts. And actually, many people have to work on this. Yeah? Many of us have had to push through this to develop our metta practice. We have to really develop a faith that, look, I can uproot anger. I can get rid of anger. Yeah. I can decide to some degree what I'm thinking about. And if I'm thinking in ways that are detrimental, I can work on it. Yeah. This is the important shift in view. Yeah. From a view that I am this to, look, I am what I am doing. I am what I think. Yeah. And so if I'm thinking bad things and I change the way that I'm thinking, I'm changing the way that I am. Yeah. So I'm going to work towards getting over this. So if we find that we're thinking a lot of bad things about X, then we should stop thinking bad things about X. Yeah. It's just like, and if we can't be around X without thinking bad thoughts, then just don't be around X. Right? Don't be around that person. Don't be around that thing. Yeah. Now it's not always the go-to strategy. We might try our best to get away from leaf blowers, and yet they find us somehow wherever we choose to live. Yeah. There's always a barking dog. Yeah. We can't get away from it, it seems. But if we don't think about it, yeah, we'd be like, oh, here I am in the room next to the window where I can hear that barking dog really easily. What if I were to go into the other room with the loud air conditioner? where I couldn't hear the barking dog, then I might stop thinking about how much that dog barks. And if I stopped thinking about how much that dog barks, I would no longer have an object for the anger, and maybe the anger would start to settle. It's just, it's incredibly straightforward and powerful. Yeah. Where this really shines is our modern world, right? And I can't say this to people enough. Take advantage of this, right? We all are kind of being influenced by all of these bits of media that are impacting us. And by extension, the people that we talk to every day, even if we don't like watch the news or surf on Twitter or the things that people do, even if we don't do a lot of that, the people around us are. And they're just like mouthing the things that they hear. Did they hear that so-and-so said this? Can you believe it? And it's like, you don't really need to read the news. Just listen to what people are talking about and you know what the news said. Yeah. But here's the thing. If you find that if you have a political affiliation and every time you hear about a certain other political affiliation, you get angry, then look at the news programs that you watch. You might find that they're always talking about that political party you don't like. And it makes you angry. So even if you feel like really informed, even if you go onto a subreddit somewhere and it tells you all of the things that are controversial and you feel like really informed about all of these controversial things, if reading that makes you angry, then it's just really simple advice. Don't read it. Just stay away from it. Yeah. And it's just, this is not willful ignorance. This is not apathy. This is being selective. It's saying like, look, every time I'm in the presence of that, I get angry. So what if I just don't go in the presence of that thing? Yeah. And if we really accept that this is a viable strategy, lo and behold, we're going to stop doing the thing that keeps making us angry, and then there's going to be a space. We will learn to fill that with things that don't make us angry. And then we've got, a balanced lifestyle, and we may be able to find a way to get news that doesn't make us angry all the time. I don't know if it's possible, but in theory, there might be a way. I haven't heard of it, but somewhere maybe we might be able to have like online conversations with people that don't piss us off. Again, theoretically, yeah. And if we find that no matter where we go, this is like angry, aversive, frustrated people just venting their frustrations, and we can't help but pick up on it, this is when we really start reducing our screen time and we really start like blocking out certain sites. And this is incredibly powerful for our state of mind. Yeah. Even if we don't have a strong metta practice, if we remove the things that are making us consistently angry, our basic mental state is getting better. All the more when we have like a really strong grudge that keeps coming up, we can just stay away from the circumstances that have it come up. Where for the most part, the rest of our day is kind of unaffected. The grudge is only there when we come in contact with the thing that really sparks it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just an underlying anger that without an object will dissipate. And the final strategy is to reflect on karma. And this is very similar and tied to equanimity, but it's to say that all beings are the owners of their actions. Yeah. And this works phenomenally well for people who have come from Asian cultures or Asian backgrounds. If you've grown up in a Buddhist country, I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've heard somebody say, well, I guess it's just my karma. So I guess I deserved it. I guess I wronged that person in a past life. I guess, this is, it was just going to come my way. And this actually brings them a lot of comfort. And it's actually kind of is sad when somebody in a Western country says, look, I don't believe in that, this hocus pocus stuff. And you're like, okay, well, it's your loss. This is actually really comforting to think maybe I had it coming. Maybe that guy cut me off because I've cut him off 1,000 times before in past lives. Maybe I cut off his mother yesterday in traffic, and he heard about it and he's been upset until this very moment. And so it's like if you were to think that way, you'd be like, well, this is totally appropriate. You go. Good for you. Yeah. And that's about as close as to mudita as you can kind of get. It's like, well, how could it be any other way? I deserve it. I had it coming. But also in the other way, like if we really were to believe that this person is doing something that is harming us, if they even negligently, but even intentionally, who again, we can't read minds, so we don't know. But even if we were to suspect this, just thinking, well, look, I don't have to focus on them getting their results. Like anger has results. I've seen this in my own life. So their anger is going to produce bad results in their life. I don't have to make it happen. I don't have to dwell on it. I don't have to fantasize about all the bad things that are going to happen to them. It's like I can actually just feel sorry for them. Look, yeah, it sucks. You're going to have bad karma. Like bad things are going to happen because of this. And then you're thinking about suffering suddenly. You got a little spark of compassion can kind of come up and be like, oh man, that stinks. You're yelling at so and so. You know, I could be angry at you, but I just kind of feel sorry for you. It's like this isn't going to help the situation. And often this will lead to a very strong sense of equanimity, right? It'll lead to you being the calmest person in the room, being like, look, we don't, there's a lot of ways that this can go down, but for us to get angry is not the most productive of them. And if we find that the other person is actually angry, they are intentionally trying to push our buttons, all the more reason to be like, well, look, it takes two to tango and I'm not dancing. So you just dance yourself just till you're exhausted and then we'll talk, right? And that's just like, this is also the karma of anger, you know, to just be like, you know, this can't last forever. So let's just wait it out. Yeah. And in the meantime, I'm going to try not to do anything I'll regret. And that is wisdom, right? If we have anybody in our social circles or in our community who can do that, then we're like, look, however this is going to go down, let's just not get angry. Let's try to find a way to sort this out, because the anger is the worst way that this can go. Then that's the person we'll go to when times are tough. Yeah, because this is a very hard thing to do, but it's a very profitable thing to do. Again, these are the five strategies that the Buddha says. And as you can see, they're kind of strongly built around our interpersonal relationships. Yeah. Built around the Brahma Viharas, which are the four possible wholesome, you know, emotions that we can have that don't have anger in them. Yeah. So these are we can mix and match, pick any strategy. That I find the most important thing to do is to have the thought. Yeah. And I do know people who are of the aversion type who will read a sutta like this every morning. They'll include it in their chanting so that when they find themselves getting angry, they're like, okay, wait, stop. I'm really getting angry at so-and-so. What am I supposed to do? Cultivate loving kindness. It's not working. Cultivate compassion. It's like, I don't care if they're suffering. Cultivate equanimity. It's like, okay, ignore the person. Oh, okay. I'm going to go over there. Give me a minute. And I was over there, really like, oh, we're all the owners of our karma. Yeah, you're right. They're going to get their karma. I'm going to get my karma. It's all going to work out. This is temporary. This is impermanent. This too shall pass. Okay, maybe I can go back over there and just put up with the person until we both go our separate ways. And so the most important thing is remembering that this is important, worthwhile, vital to do. Yeah. Uproot your resentments, overcome your resentments. Don't let your resentments fester. Don't cultivate them. If you see them coming up, think, this is a really big problem for me. Like, I've got to find some way to get free of this, even if it involves like running and like locking ourselves in a bathroom until we can breathe through it and kind of get over it. Yeah. Because that would be to our long-lasting happiness and welfare, to not act on anger and to not cultivate or develop anger. So on this Uposatha night, I offer this sutta. Have you take a look at it, and these reflections, may they be of use in your practice.